Hello, everybody. So just thank you for the introduction. This is more a talk that's come out of the LobbyCon that goes alongside previous AutoCons, where I've spoken to other people who have worked in campuses, sometimes universities, sometimes large enterprises, where they don't know how to get started, or they look at the task ahead of them going, we want network automation, it's going to make our lives easier. How do we get there? And there isn't an easy answer. But we're going to go through and I'm going to go through my experiences, what I've seen with the team I work with, and the lessons learned so far. And hopefully this is more of an encouragement for people to forge on ahead and get things going. So, who am I? 16 years in IT, 14 in networking. I moved into networking at about a week's notice in my position in a university 14 years ago. The sole network administrator wanted to take a honeymoon. They needed a cover. I was closest. I learned how to. I basically got dropped in front of a Cisco switch and core switches, routers, firewalling, with about a week's notice, expected to learn everything, and just sat there for 2 weeks hoping nothing would fall over. Thankfully it didn't. And then just carried on doing networking after that point. So 10 years in higher education, university in London, and then decided to move on to a different industry, started a company called AEG Europe in 2019, became the network infrastructure architect there in 2020, and took up that role globally across the entirety of AEG in 2022. So AEG, for those who don't know us, we're not the dishwasher company. We are the world's leading sports and live entertainment company, and we run music venues, ticketing, promotion of artists, and lots of things, and entertainment districts. So one of our most famous sites is the O2 in London, as pictured up here. Creating unforgettable memories is what we do. And effectively, from a technology experience, the technology has to work and the network behind it has to work, because we want the unforgettable experiences to be the customers going in to our site, having a good time, enjoying the concerts, and we don't want them to remember, oh, the ticket scanners didn't work, I couldn't get into the venue, had to wait 5 minutes to get in, or the queues at the bar were too long because the credit cards took too long to process. We want those things to go as smoothly as possible, and the network has to support that. And if it doesn't, well, there's some awkward meetings the next morning. So what's our remit like? So I work for the Global Technology Division within AEG, in the Network and Venue Technology team. We maintain the networks across about 25 of our venues and offices worldwide. And that remit considers us covering being an ISP. We're providing connectivity to ourselves, but also the events that come in, as well as tenants that may exist in the restaurants and shops around our venues. Major service provider, because effectively each one of our venues is a separate business. So we are providing centralized services to them. And an enterprise network team, because ultimately we're also looking after the routers, switches, firewalls at those individual sites. So in answer to that question, yes, we're covering everything. And that's with a central team of eight of us, with a few contractors doing specific tasks on the side. But that's quite a lot of remit globally for 8 people. So we'd like to make our lives easier, and automation hopefully is the way to do that. What's our network like? Heavy use of CLI, even the venue support staff who are on site who are not networkers, they're basically everybody doing jacks of all trade, they're running out cables, they're controlling the signage, they're doing all aspects of IT in the venue, can log on to switches, but they have a restricted TACACS feature set. They can set macros and templates for individual interfaces. There are some use of vendor controllers, so wireless and firewall controllers to centralize management of all those things. But we also have a fairly well-standardized hardware architecture design. So most of our sites conform to a fairly standard set of design, depending on the size they are. But not every region or venue operates the same way. The US is more driven towards reselling connectivity out to customers or media. Whereas in Europe and Germany, for example, some of that might be given away as part of the event package sold when somebody books the venue. So the requirements of our local teams differ, and the requirements of those local regions differ because of local market issues or anything along those lines. And also, because we've got local individual teams, the processes that they run are individual, sometimes individual to those teams, sometimes they're documented, sometimes they're undocumented. But that makes pivoting our entire enterprise as a global whole to automation a little bit more challenging, because we have to take all those processes and what they do into account. And in some cases, that's going to be, we can fix things with automation and make lives easier. Sometimes we're going to have to change those business processes behind it. So what's driving our need for automation? Well, we've got a lot more business needs coming in that need to be met quickly. We're about to hit the summer period, which is when most of our indoor venues fall quiet. We have outdoor events, festivals and other events that go on, but all the indoor venues will then, at the same time, decide to take on lots of refurbishment projects, lots of updates to the building, lots of new technology to put in, and they all want our attention at the same time. And of course, we need to do that whilst making sure that they're kept secure, operational, nothing else breaks. And there are events in between in these periods. There's a lot fewer, but they still have to work. And as I mentioned, there's security assurance is crucial as well. We obviously, there's a large amount of risk in running a venue. We want to keep our cyber insurance costs low, so we need to make sure that we can hit all the audit targets. And sometimes those targets are also set by sports leagues themselves. So in the US, the NBA, the NHL, for example, will want to make sure, Major League Soccer will want to make sure that our venues are safe for them to operate their sports in, from a technology perspective. So we translated that to fix the stuff that gets dropped on at short notice, or keeps getting dropped on at short notice, to minimize the risk of any error when that happens, because if we have a standard operating procedure that is 20 pages long, somebody's going to skip two of the steps in that standard operating procedure. We want to keep things as uniform as possible. We want to try and avoid drift in configuration or implementation. So basically, we've got the designs, but we want to make sure that they're consistently applied. If we can automate those designs being pushed out, that minimizes those mistakes. And those mistakes don't necessarily turn up from day one. They could turn up 2 years down the line. And obviously, empower other teams to do more with less demand on network resource. It basically means we're giving the teams on the coalface at the front in the venues the ability to deliver what they need without having to wait for us to respond to an email or a ticket, and hopefully keep them happy and keep our customers happy that we're delivering things quickly as well. So, where have we gone so far? The first challenge we found that we really needed to fix was the data. Basically, every site also had its own set of documentation, its own set of spreadsheets, or even every region had its own set of spreadsheets. We also knew that if we were to open up a new site, a new venue, another vendor wanted to put their name in lights above it, we would have to use that venue's hardware. It's not a great look if you have an arena sponsored by Juniper with Cisco access points in the ceiling, because they're not going to take warmly to that. Align the automation work we do with other business projects. There's no point in us coming up with a perfect automation-friendly solution for a problem that doesn't exist yet, or is not likely to exist for a few years. So we basically looked at aligning some of our projects with hardware refreshes, new projects that came out, new buildings that came out. And this one is a phrase I've not seen used before, but I quite like it, which is document before deploy. A lot of the problems that we have are because of the short notice tasks. It's basically like the kit's turned up, we put it out, and we go, okay, I've done putting the kit out, I'll come back at some point and document it. I'm pretty sure you can understand that none of that gets documented. If we try to drive the configuration, the assurance, everything from the documentation that we make before we, as we're planning to build the site, and not in a Word document, a spreadsheet, or in a bunch of team messages and email, then hopefully that's something that can be then updated, kept up to date, and then used as a point to say, this is what we intended to do, why is it drifted, why is it changed? And the final thing is, we're a large organization that exists in three continents globally. It's going to take time. We can't just go on a lovely trip around the world, go to every office and document everything. Business as usual has got to happen as well. Also, we can't fix the physical state of all our facilities. What we want to do is we want to actually speed up the deployment of hardware, speed up the deployment of everything else, and then it gives us more time when we're pressed for time to make the spaces look nice. We've come across plenty of this. Whilst this is not a photo of one of our actual sites, this is something we want to avoid ever falling into, because if it's the middle of an event, you want to find a cable, you want to find where the other end is. Tracing through knots of cables is not going to mean you're going to resolve things quickly. We have standards. We do tell all of our staff that you need to label both ends of a cable in case of you need to do an emergency hardware replacement or anything like that. The reality is you get to the point of doing a hardware replacement in a hurry, you discover half the labels are missing or half the port descriptions are missing. We want to try and, if we could hopefully fix up the technical side to be easier, then people actually follow doing the stuff that can't be automated so easily. Has it worked so far? I'll come to that in a moment. We also considered operation of how we're going to tackle the solution. We could have gone through one of the hardware vendor automation platforms, but we're not using the same vendor for everything throughout. If you've had experience with some platforms like Ubiquiti, if you end up buying, which I have in my home lab rather than professionally, if you end up buying a ISP switch, a unified access point, you need two different controllers, they don't talk to each other. So it does kind of lock you into an ecosystem if you're not careful. So a problem that happens with third-party commercial automation platforms is you have to make sure that it will do what you want, or you have to change your business processes to match it. We already have a fairly entrenched set of business processes. We're not trying to change how one business works. We're trying to change how 7 or 8 different businesses globally work. It would be a long fight to try and get something in there. Whilst we're using some tools, we're using obviously some third-party monitoring tools and things like that. They're used differently in different regions and not necessarily always in the way that the vendor would have liked us to use it in. There's community and open source tools, and there's in-house tooling. Obviously, support gets weaker and weaker as we go down this list, down to the point where if it's in-house tooling, it's basically, this tool's broken, we need to talk to the one person that wrote it. That person is probably me. I already have a full inbox. Basically, it's trying to find the balanced approach between all these approaches. I believe there's other talks this week about striking that balance, but again, the balance is really going to come down to what it is, what your availability, what it is you can take on, what it is you should take on. That's a different problem. But we've opted for a mix of things because we also already have a lot of in-house tooling that we can't change to suit the network. I'm going to mention the XKCD927 situation, but this can also apply to network automation tools. We have a lot out there already. There is no one tool that fixes every use case, and nobody's going to generate one. There is always going to be a bit of give and take. You probably should look at what exists at the moment, what you think is secure, is stable enough, what you like, what you're comfortable using. You may need to change some of your business workflows to match that. That's probably not a bad thing because you should be looking at how your processes operate, what are you doing, how can I simplify things? And sometimes it does involve going, we've been doing this for years, why have we been doing this for years? And it takes a lot of time, but it's worth doing. So we looked at sorting the data first and foremost. We deployed a source of record in 2020, 2021. There was a pandemic. There wasn't much going on. Obviously, in the live events industry, it's not a great time for profit when you can't fill an arena full of 20,000 people because they'll probably all catch something and it would be bad press, and we're also technically all locked down in our houses anyway. We had a legacy unmaintained IPAM system. It needed replacing regardless. It was unpatched. There was other stuff that was actually being put into spreadsheets. It was time for a fresh slate. We had plenty of time. We weren't exactly buying new hardware at that time. So at the time, everybody was talking about NetBox. So we just moved everything into NetBox. And then we also had the advantage of it did extra things that we were doing manually anyway. So for DCIM, we could actually have rack layouts that were put in a web browser rather than constantly having to edit Visio diagrams of how our data centers looked or how our core facilities looked. And that was that was great, because then those diagrams tied in with actual data on how everything worked. Again, a slight issue with lockdown is it's not exactly being locked down. It wasn't exactly easy to go and visit all these sites or go abroad and visit those sites. So physical inspections and physical audits took a bit longer than we expected, and we realized that it was going to be a case of probably years before we had everything up to date. And also we assume in our actual venues, there are comms facilities that change on a daily basis depending on the event. Stuff is repatched daily. The frontline teams that will be doing that will not want to be having to update their cabling in NetBox every time that happens. We work around this by having temporary cables a different color from the stuff that should be permanently in there. Usually it's pulled out after the event. Sometimes it isn't, but we can go back and we've got something to compare what should exist and what shouldn't exist. I also want to use source of record, not source of truth, because as a network team, our source of truth is not the same as every other team's source of truth. It'd be great if everybody could settle on one source of truth, but those tools do not solve those teams' problems. My best example is basically asset database and financial reporting. Our asset database covers every IT asset across the business, including laptops. We do not want to be monitoring that in NetBox. It's just a waste of database rows. But it should be in sync with our network source of record. Same with our InfoSec tools. It should be put rather than actually every time we open a new site or issue a new subnet, we have to inform InfoSec. There should be a link between the two systems. It should be automating, pushed into other people, reporting into other people's systems. Same for the observability and monitoring tools. We should not have to be updating new devices in one tool now that we put it in our source of record. If we call ourselves the source of truth, then we're saying we're better than all these other systems that other people may be relying on as their truth. It's truth to us, but it's basically a record for what the network does across the entire business. The reconciliation is where it's the less fun side of automation, but it's also probably some of the most important, because it means you've got multiple tools all singing from the same hymn sheet, and it's not easy to do. So with NetBox in place, with our source of record there, are we automated? No, there's still a mystery step in the middle of what happens next. So we have other projects underway. We want to align our automation strategy with what we're doing. So we look at device deployment based off the source of record. Again, trying to pivot towards the concept of document before deploy. We want to build the devices out in NetBox, use that data in NetBox to push out a template, and bingo, a site should just pop up as soon as you plug in all the devices. So we had a venue open in 2022 in the Midlands in the United Kingdom. The network was needed whilst the venue was being constructed to commission the services in the building. So CCTV, BMS systems, door access control, all that needed a network before the building could be handed over into us as a customer. So therefore, we had to go in as a supplier to the supplier to provide a network. It gets a bit confusing. But either way, the network went in before the building was finished, which also meant a lot of horse trading because we had to work out with all the suppliers, different contractors, what it is they actually needed, what devices they were putting in, what needed patching in beforehand, and we were turning up to site before the building was ready really for use and putting a network in, having to go through construction courses, where the full hard hat and everything. Everything was planned in P-planned and IP and DSIM tools with the intent to automatically deploy devices. However, the construction schedule overran. There was no intake into the building for any external services, including connectivity, to come in. Delays in on-site connectivity, including even just the patch leads being delivered on time, basically meant that we ended up just configuring everything ourselves. We didn't know when things were going to be ready until about a day before we were needed on site. So we weren't geared up for it. So we ended up just having to. It was only really 5 comms rooms that needed building out, but still, we weren't ready. We had to fall back, do things manually. So we tried again in 2024 with a refresh of one of our bigger campuses in Los Angeles. When we became a global network team back in 2022, one of our sites got refreshed entirely by a third party. They came in, they deployed out, they looked at our existing configs, copied those existing configs, put them onto a new switch, put them onto new hardware, put the new hardware in, and then walked off again with job done. Obviously, that meant that all the new hardware they put in had all the issues of configuration the existing hardware had, including like incorrect NTP servers. Sometimes the TACAC servers were correct, sometimes they weren't. It was just basically rip out the old stuff, copy the config, change the interface names, put it all back in, hope for the best. So when we did our other site in Los Angeles, we did the refresh around events that were happening on a daily basis because there were three at the time, there were 3 sports teams based at the arena. There was basically an event every night. The source of record was before devices were deployed, we fed the source of record, or we fed Netbox with Netbox scripts. So there's one page of fields for each engineer to fill out, put in the details, what networks they needed on the device, where the device was going, what location it was going in. It then obviously issued management IP addresses, built uplink interfaces, and the device config was ready to go. We did not do zero-touch provisioning. We had an incredibly capable team that were more than capable of copying and pasting, or just copying a file to USB and back onto the device. We did not have the time to spin up the infrastructure for doing plug and play on that site. But the device configs were based off Ginger 2 templates that we had stashed in Git so we could see any changes to them, and they harmonized with our best practice in architectural design. And the lessons we've learned from that were lessons that we can now take forward, and when we do another site, we can do it better. Some of the issues came up with the fact that we couldn't do some of the, there were some architectural questions or some weird networks that came along that effectively the engineers on the ground just fudged back together, maybe not in a way that was properly documented. There's still some assurance we have to go back and do. That's a part of a second phase that we'll have to come back and check and do in the next few months. But everything was deployed promptly. 15 pages of an SOP of how to deploy a device, which was usually ignored, and basically they say the existing device config just copied and put onto a new device. We brought down to 5. It was mostly those 5 pages were mostly screenshots of what to fill in the Netbox script. As I said on my last slide, there's still no scope for the engineers to induce drift, but we should be able to do better than that over time as we develop. The process is adaptable for kit by any reasonable vendor. If we again have another vendor sponsor a site and we want to use their kit there instead. The other problem is, again, with the new technology that comes in, everybody wants us to deploy a new network for their wireless-enabled microwave ovens that go in suites or other crazy devices that just come to us at short notice. Again, discussed earlier today, the network just should not be the blocker of these devices being deployed. It usually never is. Getting the requirements of what those devices actually need is more the headache, but it's always the networks team fault when we ask. I appreciate that. It's a work in progress. We don't have enough standardization of the process or requirements gathering because they're usually so opaque that we haven't worked out a way of how to size or segment networks to make this work entirely automatically yet. But we are abstracting parts of it. DHCP scope creation. On our newer sites, which use KEA, Linux serve scopes, we're just automatically generating the config out of data in our source of record. And it's only pushed out correctly and verified if it's in the source of record. But we're not doing any of this live yet because if we automatically do an event-driven thing that changes DHCP and it breaks during an event, and know we can get an IP lease during an event, that might break the event and that would not be good. So we're still trying to work out how to fit things in where changes only happen when it's safe to do so, when there's no event on, when somebody actually physically decides to drive the event in the first place. So, what have we won so far? This is currently a diagram of everything that's going on or everything that's a work in process. Everything that's orange is a manual pushed process. So it's basically not event driven. It's a human has to take the option to actually push that configuration to those tools. Green is something where it's automatic. Our config backup tool is not, if that gets the wrong information, it's not going to fall over. And the stuff in grey is the stuff that is a work in progress. So feeding device and subnet information to InfoSec vulnerability scanners is something that is definitely wanted by our InfoSec team, but we're waiting to engage with them in a way that works with that. One thing that's interesting there is Microsoft Teams. In the US, there are various regulations saying that you must provide location information every time somebody makes a 911 call. When you start using soft phones, the Teams client looks at LLDP information or BSSID information from the device that machine's connected to and compares that to a database that Microsoft hold that then forwards the 911 call on to the right operator in the US. So we have to assure that all our devices are in the right place where we think they are, that they're serving that area correctly, and that the operator has the right information, otherwise the fines get messy. And also, again, ties into our asset database, discovery tools for assurance, and assurance with vendor network controllers is also a work in progress. It's just not as big as the other problems we've had to deal with in deployment. As I said earlier, we're not doing event-driven automation because we're scared. We're not scared, but we're anxious that if something was event-driven, whilst a band was on stage, whilst the sports team was playing, and our services were to fall over, it would not be good. So we're trying to look at trying to event-drive things within safe times, but not every venue uses the same calendaring system. We don't have a way of automating knowing when it's safe to do so. So we're still thinking about an approach to that. And we're not automatically healing drift on devices or updating the source of record based on that drift. Yet we're looking at ways of trying to give our team visibility of what's drifted and what from our source of record, and either accept it or revert it. But we're more concerned at the moment. The mistake we've made so far is not just talking to our vendors enough. That's hardware vendors and automation vendors. We sort of tried to do our own thing and then discovered that actually on the roadmap for hardware vendors, or the roadmap for Netbox, or the roadmap for this other tool, is this problem that we're trying to solve that they've solved in their own way. I'd rather avoid writing my own code to fix a problem if somebody else is writing it and going to support it going forward. I don't have time. It's replication of work. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. I do tend to overthink things. I do try to foresee situations that probably will never happen and try to work around those, and that means nothing gets done. and writing a script that does something 80% right and gets it done and saves that time is still better than something that gets 100% right for all scenarios. At the same time, if I have to give something up, or if we have to give up a tool or give up a script and replace it, that's fine. You've learned the lessons along the way. It's not a failure to have made. It's not a failure if something has to change. As a business, our requirements have changed. We've divested parts of our business. We've gained other parts of the business, other businesses over the way. Our requirements are always changing as a business. That means the network requirements, the network automation requirements will always change. And finally, I'm not doing this alone. I'm working with a fantastic team of people who have been on board, who have been engaged all the way, and have helped deliver this. There have been times where, especially with the US-UK time difference, communication has been difficult, and I've not been around to answer questions they may have in the middle of a deployment, but keeping them on board is fantastic. Keeping teams outside the network team engaged is great. And I'm not going to mention anything about the management side or any problems with that, because we generally haven't. My own management's been very, very keen on pushing this along because it saves us time. It means we're delivering things more professionally. Also, shout out to the network automation landscape that Steinsy's written. It just shows there's so much to choose from now in how to solve problems. Maybe too much choice. Maybe that's quite scary for some people, but take it away, have a play, see how it goes. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you very much.
Hi, quick question. Can you expand on source of truth versus source of record?
As I say, it's basically, I use source of record to avoid fighting with other teams that believe that what they do is the truth. Truth sounds a bit overarching, like the network team is trying to control things. We've got fantastic cross-team relationships. Record is basically what we're doing. It is still our truth, but it's basically a record of what the network's expecting and what we're doing and how we do things. Source of truth, given that we don't have other teams like server teams necessarily documenting all their hardware, all their virtual machines in NetBox, I don't want to say this is a source of truth for you guys. It's not my decision to make, really.
So it sounds like the venues and sites that you operate are quite different, so there's a diversity there.
Yeah.
How do you then test the automation that you are deploying?
In a perfect world, it would be I could spin up container labs or a virtual environment to do this. I actually still do it with a physical lab, mostly because I want to ensure that I'm testing on actual hardware that is used on those sites. The other part of the issue is that some of the hardware, the virtual equivalents of, say, the Catalyst 9000 series, require 18 gigs of RAM to boot up as a virtual image or container, and trying to boot up 4 or 5 of those, you suddenly start needing some fairly beefy kit anyway. It's easier to take stuff that's either destined to be deployed or in the spare or as hot as in the spares pile and test on that to ensure that stuff works, because it's just easier to test on actual hardware. It kind of gives the venues a slightly warmer feel that we're doing the right thing. I would love to be able to do it in a virtual environment. The slight problem with, say, with the Catalyst 9000 series is because it actually can virtualize things and contains itself, it suddenly becomes quite a beefy little virtual machine.
Thank you so much.